this was a way of getting acquainted a little bit, but also it's a way of saying that storytelling is really important, particularly stories of people and events that came before us. So I spent a lot of time, as you know, preaching. And to me, being a preacher is being conversational with people like you, because I know some of you are sitting out there and you're worshiping. I think about your lives. I think about the things I read in the newspapers, the news, watching TV. But of course, another conversation I have is with the Bible, which is about 4,000 years of history. And then all the people that have come before us. And I know when you're young, well, they don't have to be young. At any age, we get so caught up in what's right in front of us, we don't think there's anything to really be more important than that. In some ways, that's true. But if we don't think anything of real significance happened before we were born, we are like spiritual orphans. It's like we were just dropped into the world with no deeper, broader, longer conversation than that. About half of or more of my sermon, when I write a sermon, is having a conversation with the people that have come before us, because I can learn things from that. I can be surprised by that. And that's what we're going to do tonight. We're going to have a conversation with somebody that came before us, and just a minute we're going to get introduced to them. I really believe this is important. Some years ago, I had a Jeep CJ7. It got fairly old, and I had to top off a lot of the time. You know, a lot of things got a little loose and worn out. Rear view mirror completely, the glue dried, fell off, couldn't reattach it. I knew I needed to do something, but I thought I can do pretty well without that. And I tried to drive without a rear view mirror for about a week. Now, a lot of you are not driving yet, but someday you will. And surprising, to be able to move forward, you have to have some sense of what's going on behind you. And that's what we're going to talk about today. I think we can have a lot of fun doing that. I want it to be interesting. We're going to talk here in just a minute. First of all, let's just pique their interest in asking, because I don't expect all of you to be historians and experts at this point in Methodist history. Why don't you ask some of those basic questions?
Yeah. All right, I'm going to share my screen so those of you online can see it too. All right. So today we're learning about John Wesley. So I'm going to ask you some questions, and y'all just shout it out. Shout out what you think the answer is, okay? See how much we already know. So who knows what John Wesley is famously known for? And those of you online, just unmute yourself and shout it out if you need to. What do you think?
Starting the Methodist Church.
Starting the Methodist Church?
All right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I barely heard of it before.
Well, that's
Founding Methodism. You basically got it right.
Yes.
All right. Nice. Annabelle, do you have pastor parents or something? All right. This one is, I don't know, I feel like there should be a special prize.
Or just get close.
Yeah.
I'd be impressed, just, the half a century.
Mm-hmm. All right, everyone, just pop. Yeah, go ahead. What do you think? What year was John Wesley born?
1703.
All right. Who else? Give me some guesses. What are you going to say, William? Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
18 something.
18 something?
I was going to say 1895.
1895. Izzy, what were you going to say?
Probably like, I don't know,
200 BC. I like it. I like it. Go ahead, Grayson.
what was it? 1864.
1864. Any other guesses? All right. Well, Sally got it right. And William, 1703.
let's put that in perspective, history. Okay, somebody said 1864. That's the end of the Civil War. Okay, 1864.
Yeah.
What happened in 1776?
That's when we became a country.
Right, 1703. That's the beginning part of that century. So when did the first colonies? When was Jamestown and Plymouth? Anybody remember those?
Say it again.
1507.
Yeah. So just put that in perspective. About 100 years after the first people started coming to America, John Wesley comes into the world. So that's just
yeah. All right. As a child, John Wesley almost died in a tragic what?
Accident.
Well, what? Wonderful. Now, the next part of the question, what do you think the accident was? Flood. A what?
A car.
Cars? Were cars? Cars weren't invented back then.
A cart crash.
Yeah, a cart crash. There you go. Yeah, like a horse. Yeah, okay.
Or falling off a praising stone. He's like standing up there talking, and then he falls off and crashes into people.
What would they say?
Say it again, Grayson.
He stands on something really tall, and then he falls off.
Ah, there you go. He jumped off the roof like Annabelle's grandmother. Got it. What? As a child, John Wesley almost died in a tragic. What was the accident? Flood. We got.
Fire, famine.
All right, let's just fill the blanket on that. If you've never been to England, when you go to England, you're going to see a bunch of historic homes. In fact, some of the newer homes still have these thatched roofs made out of kind of brush, and it's just thick as can be. And so you can imagine when something like that catches fire. So he was living in, we'll talk about him in a town called Epworth. He was a minister's son. Catches fire, whole bunch of children in there. They think they got everybody out, and they look out second floor window, and here's John Wesley. So they back up a hay wagon, and they entice him. They say, "It's okay, you'll survive." And he jumps out of the second floor into the hay wagon. His mother witnesses all this, and she quotes scripture. She said, "It was like a brand plucked from the fire. A brand that was burning, and he was saved." And she felt there was something special about his being saved and his life. So here,
This was much more extreme than my great brother.
It was kind of it jumped out of a second floor window. So y'all could, if y'all want to write these answers down, it might be fun to know this later on. All right, so Rob alluded to this. There were a lot of kids in John Wesley's house, which is why they weren't able to recognize
how many were out
and how many were in. So just popcorn guess, how many siblings do you think John Wesley had? So there's 2. Okay, 13. There's 2 possible answers. 2? Way more than that, my friend. But hey, he did have 2 plus several more. Go ahead. Yes. Go ahead, Gigi.
34.
Wow, I like it. His poor mother. 15. 11. Any other ideas? Go ahead, William.
12.
Okay. Say it again, Holden.
12.
Well, all right. Well, go ahead. Well, that's the thing. There's 2 answers. Oops. He had 19 total, but only 12 made it to adulthood. So back then, medicine was not the same as it is now. And so, but his mother gave birth 19 times. She had 19 children that she carried. Which I'm on number 2, and I'm like, I could not do 19.
How many children did the old woman that lived in the shoe.
Pretty much what many children, she didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. You want to add anything
All
about that?
right, so I hope this has gotten your appetite up a little for knowing a little more about this man. Interesting thing, we gave the answer. Someone said, what did John Wesley do? Said he started our church. He never meant to start a denomination.
So that's important.
He meant to change the church. He saw himself as a reformer, as somebody like giving, resuscitating, giving CPR to the church and bringing it to life. So I think you will enjoy the story. Now I'm going to tell you a little bit about when I was growing up. I really enjoyed sitting around when my uncles would come, and after supper, and my aunts times, we would go into, my family came to England. So there was a lot of history of still drinking tea. So they would drink some tea after supper, and we would go and kind of in the living room, and I'd hear them tell stories. So my generations got real stretched out because my grandfather, Blackburn, was in his 50s when my father was born. And my father was the 10th to 12th old. So when I tell you these dates, you say, Ron, you couldn't be that old. Just your grandfather was good. So my grandfather grew up in a little town called Horsforth, England. And he became part of the Methodist movement, he and his family. And they had a large family, but they were very active. And he was something of an adventurer, he and his brother. And they read this story in the London Times that there was this property in Florida, this tropical paradise called Florida. And it looked affordable. So they bought so many shares and so many lots in this outside of Sarasota, Florida, which was really hardly a town at that point. So they booked passage on a ship to Tampa. They got off the boat and they discovered that the land they had bought was swamplands all underwater. It's called the Great Sarasota Swamplands. So my grandfather Blackburn buys a horse. His brother goes north to Tallahassee. He goes south on the Tamiami Trail, which was a dirt road all the way down to Miami. And he goes to work in a saloon in Miami. And it was a restaurant and a saloon. And he found out there were no Methodists like what we are in Miami. And he started the first Methodist church in Miami. And he wrote a little book called Pioneering the East Coast of Florida. And he talked about all the churches that he helped start. And he talked about getting on a rowboat one day and riding out to the sandbar and have a picnic with some of his friends. And today that sandbar is South Beach, Miami, with all the hotels and all. So anyway, that got my curiosity up. What was I a part of, this movement called Methodist? Why did it get into my family DNA and what made it important? So I became very curious about John Wesley, and I traveled to England several times to see where John Wesley grew up and what he lived, how he lived, but more importantly, his story. I want to tell some of his story to you all tonight. Okay, those of you who'd like to see the maps, this is England. So this is Scotland, of course, up here. Epworth, little town, it's about the size of Weaverville, except the difference between Epworth and Weaverville has places like Asheville that are close by. Epworth is pretty much an isolated little village. In fact, if you go to downtown Epworth today, it doesn't look much different than it did John Wesley's day. The same pub and restaurant that was there in the center of town is still there. The church he grew up in. And then we're going to later on, you're going to hear me talk about Oxford, where he went to college, Bristol, and London, just so we all have a perspective. So much of his world was that. So we're going to go to Epworth right now.
There you go.
All right, this is marks his, that's his, you see his dates. This is actually on the floor of at Oxford College. Pretty significant that at Oxford College on the main campus, and this is the primary chapel for the huge Oxford University. His name is on the floor with the name of his brother.
Animal's got a question.
I don't have a question. He lived for 88 years.
Oh,
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Okay, now we're going to take you, I think we'll see some pictures This is the Methodist Chapel that is there. It was built later after the Methodist movement started, and that is a worshiping Methodist church. Like if you went there this morning, they were worshiping, and so our group just spent some time there. So it was a really nice chapel, sanctuary.
Recording in progress.
This is the church that he grew up in, and this is the chalice that he took communion from. It's kind of neat. They didn't have his chalice locked up, and you would think that, and this is actually the Anglican church, but they still own John Wesley, even though he tried to reform Anglican church, and they love the Wesleyan heritage, and we got to take communion from that chalice.
Yeah. So that was what John Wesley was. He was an Anglican.
Yeah, which is in the States, you'd be an Episcopalian. You know the church right across the street from us, Trinity Episcopal. That's the Anglican version in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, this is a statue of him near the Methodist church there.
Yep.
By the way, he was about, what, 5'3", I think it is.
Most of you are probably taller than him.
Now these pictures are okay, I told you about the parsonage that burned, and they built a new parsonage. And these are the original floorboards. A lot of the house is still original, and you can go there and walk through it. These are just little models of him and some of the dresses of the day and that kind of thing.
We got one more of the house.
This is the kitchen. This is very significant because in a minute I'm going to tell you, well, let me tell you right now, because the kitchen makes me want to tell you about Susanna Wesley. So in many ways, the Methodist Church was not started by a man. It was really started probably more by a woman. And by that, I mean the spiritual mentor, who influenced John Wesley most was his mother. 19 children, 12 lived to adulthood. She was classically trained musically. She knew 3 languages, very unusual for a woman in the 1600s, 1700s to have the education that she had. She homeschooled all her children. And she was so devoted to them. Wesley said every week, not only did she teach all of them several languages, she taught them music. And by the way, she taught the girls this full curriculum that the boys got, which was not heard of. It was egalitarian. The women and girls were treated the same. So every week she would spend an hour with each one of those children. And she wanted to know, how are you doing? How are you feeling about life? What can we do better as parents? She had that kind of intentional time. Another thing that he learned from her, a lot of things he learned from her, she was very open-minded. She said, yes, we are people of beliefs, and what we believe are very important. But even if we can't agree on all things, can't we agree that we are to love God and to love neighbor? She said, can't we agree on the things that are essential and disagree on the things that don't matter? She taught him just a very open-minded spirit. She also believed that if you're going to be a Christian, it should make a difference in how you live, how you treat the neighbors, how you relate to the world, how you use your resources. And she had a hard life. I mean, let's face it. 19 children, 12 survived adulthood. To find her own peace of mind, to have her own space. Back then, women had about 6 or 7 skirts. And what she would do, she would flip 3 or 4 of those up over her head. And that was a signal to the children. Mom's having a little bit of me time.
We should bring that back.
So, all right, this part of the story I find hard to believe, but Epworth was not a rich town, a little agricultural town. And they went through some hard times agriculturally. And during the winter time, the seas would rise and Epworth became literally an island cut off from the larger towns. So her husband Samuel, the church was not able to pay his salary. He gets in debt. And back in that day, he got in debt and was sent to debtor's prison. So her husband, who was the rector of that Anglican church that I just showed you, he gets sent to debtor's prison. So they send an interim pastor, and frankly, she found that his presence there was just weak. His sermons just were maudlin, just didn't make a lot of sense. So in this kitchen, and it's a little large room, you can't see how far it comes out this way. She started teaching these classes, like a Sunday school class on Sunday evening. It started with 8 people. Before long, there were 200 people, and they were coming out into the courtyard. So the interim pastor writes to the bishop and says, Samuel Wesley's wife is creating all kind of turmoil by having these courses there. And so the bishop writes Samuel Wesley in prison and says, you got to stop your wife. He writes her this letter. We have copies of all this. All this is in German. He says, you need to just let go of this. She writes back a letter and says, unless you convince me that God Almighty is telling me not to do this, I will not cease to sin. Wow. So wow. There's the strong spirit behind this kind of movement called Methodism. And I think Wesley caught that kind of spirit from his mother, that faith should make a difference. It should be transformative. And so much of it started right there in that kitchen. Let's see if we can, I think one of these pictures will show you the outside. Yeah, that's exactly the house he grew up in. That's how it looked, and that's how it looks today.
Is that him, that statue?
Yeah. Okay.
Whoa, that's pretty.
Yeah, okay. Now, so Wesley grows up in this little town called Epworth, but he's very well educated. So he attends Oxford College. Now, Oxford University is a huge university. In fact, I think your dad went and did a study program there. Or is it that or Cambridge? I can't remember.
I don't know.
Anyway, some of you might be able to go there someday. Go to school there or go do a semester abroad. Oxford University is huge. But what they do is have all these smaller colleges that often don't have more than 200-300 students. So Christ Church was one of the most highly regarded schools, and this is part of the campus. So John Wesley, this is interesting. How did he go there? He didn't have a lot of money. When it was time for him to go to college, he walked from Epworth 200-something miles. You know, okay, that's what you do. You're going to go to college, you want to do something. So here's John Wesley at Oxford. Isn't that pretty, that courtyard? Beautiful. This is the chapel there, which is the main chapel of the whole university, where we saw that. That courtyard is so protected. I tried to walk out there on the grass, and somebody said, no, you can't walk out. Oh.
The grass must not be touched.
Yeah.
That's the same place, is it?
Yeah, this is still part of Christ Church there at Oxford. Let's see if we can see the dining hall.
Thanks. We got this next in the dining hall.
I'm going to get off rail a little bit here. And when you go to England, they have what they call their Armistice Day. It recognizes all those that have lost their lives in the 2 world wars. And a pastor went and took a picture of these poppies that were on the Flanders field, where I think about 100,000 people lost their lives in World War I. And these poppies, so when you go around during that week, everybody's got poppies in their lapel pin. And on that particular day, the whole town stops, even in London. The buses stop for 5 minutes. Everybody just stops and there's silence. I'm getting off rail there a little bit.
They still do that from
okay.
In Canada?
It's very strong. Every village recognizes it.
Wow. All right, now it's the dining hall.
Okay. Can you pull up just the one on the left, maybe? Does that look familiar to y'all?
Those are Harry Potter water.
Yep. Guess what? This was the dining hall that was used in Harry Potter.
Really? That was also at Duke University.
that's the dining hall in the Harry Potter.
Wow.
And that's where John Wesley had his meal. That's where they still have a dining hall, and his portrait is there. This is, I can't remember what they call, these are students that have a particular role. See the top hat? So he's one of the student leaders of Christ Church.
The fireplace next. There you go.
That's in that dining hall. I think that's one in there. There's a bigger picture. This is in the chapel where his name is inscribed. Let me just stop for just a minute and tell you about his life at Oxford. So he gets there, goes to Oxford, then he goes to Lincoln College, which is another school at Oxford. And he and his brother, a man named Whitfield, 4 or 5, Piers Morgan, about 6, 7 of them said, you know, let's not be half-baked Christians. His thought was that so many people, Christianity had become just something that's kind of add-on. And he saw it as a life and not just a lifestyle entry. For instance, we all have lifestyle options. Some of you like rock, some of you might like jazz, some of you like bluegrass. We have those options. In food, you say, I like this. I like Italian rather than French. We have these tastes. And so some people would say, oh, religion, I guess I'm a Christian. I guess I could say, oh, I'm a Methodist Christian. And it's just one piece of many pieces of our life, just a little peripheral part of who we are. And Wesley wanted it to be a center part of what gave him a sense of who he was and what he was to be a part of. And so they were very disciplined. They got up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and his group, they would have the sacrament, they'd have communion together. They would read scripture, they would read books, they'd study, and then they would do acts of kindness. They would go and visit prisoners. They would go into the orphanages. They would go into the workhouses where 8-year-old children were working like slaves. They were very involved. This is something that became very important for us as Methodists, and it's in our DNA. You know what DNA is? We all have that. It's like how we live into our makeup, our genetic molecular makeup. I think groups have DNA. And part of the Methodist DNA is the piety of a warm heart, heartfelt faith, but with a social consciousness involved in the world. Like, why did Central help start Haywood Street? Why do we have people from Central that are now helping to welcome Afghan refugees? Why do we have people that go tutor at elementary school? Because being a Christian is not just a one-on-one thing between us and God. It's how we relate to the world as a whole. And now all Christians are called to do that. But I think that's been a strong part of our DNA. And that started here in this group. Now, here's where our name came from. I wish I could give you this great theological reason why we were called. So, you had these guys getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning, reading and studying, and then in the middle of the day going and visiting people in the prison. And they said, man, these guys are disciplined. And then they go, yeah, they have a method. Did you hear that word, method? So I'm sure seen graffiti on the bathroom walls in the high school where people use certain categories and names and labels. I'd like to say we have this high-minded theological background. It's more of a practical thing. These early folks had a method, and that's how we became known Methodists. Okay.
Super cool.
That's kind of So now I don't have any pictures of this. The next thing I'll tell you about. Is there any more on Christ Church? I think
no. The next is
I'll tell you a little bit about him going to Georgia. So he wants to change the world, and this man named Oglethorpe was taking people to Georgia to start this colony. Have any of you ever been to South Georgia, like the Jekyll Island, St. Simon's Island, some down there. So it's right down the corner, the southeast corner of Georgia. And so he had this vision. He'd heard there were native people in the Americas. Meaning what we used to call Indians. There were native people. And he thought this would be wonderful to meet people that many of us know very little about and how we can bring the faith to them. So he goes, he hardly ever gets to meet any native people, but he's serving this church in Fort Frederica on St. Simon's Island. In fact, the ruins of that fort are still there. He falls in love, and his love didn't work out real well. And he got so hurt that Sophie, the young woman he loved, he came down serving communion, and he refused to serve her, which was not a very Christ-like thing.
This was his girlfriend?
Yeah.
Wow.
So her parents were leaders of the church. He's in trouble. He leaves Georgia feeling like a beaten down kind of missionary failure. On the way back, he gets to know these people on the ship. They were called Moravians. It was a group of Christians out of Germany. And there was this terrible storm. And they, in the middle of the storm, got there on the deck, and the winds lapping over the boat, and they were singing hymns. And he thought, wow, these people, they have inspiring faith. So he gets back to London. He's confused. We talked about doubt being a part of, and by the way, don't ever think that doubt can't be a part of a growing faith. When you start having questions, doubt can be, I call it the ants in the pants of faith. It keeps us growing. It keeps us expanding. It keeps us stopping where we're at. So instead of just curling up in a ball, just kind of feeling sorry for himself and disappointed, he keeps thinking about his faith. He keeps working through things. And there was the Moravians and some other people were meeting on Aldersgate Street in London. And he goes and he hears this man reading Luther's introduction to Paul's book, Romans, and something just hit him. He said, you know, I was always thinking about God's love in a general sense. God loving the world, yes. God loving humanity, yes. But he said, on that night, I heard it in the first person. God loving me. And then he used this phrase that's been a big part of us as Methodists. He said, my heart was strangely warmed. My heart was strangely warmed. But then he didn't just leave it there in his own heart. So, oh, look what I have. I have this warm heart experience. He said, wow, there's so many people in the Church of England, the Anglican Church, that seem to have lost the warm heart. They don't even want anything to do with the church. And he knew so many people who worked in the mines and who worked as farmers and who did not have much in terms of resources, bigger housing. They were really cut off from the church. He said, we got to revive. We've got to resuscitate this church. So then I'm going to show you. Let's go down to. All right, so this is the meeting house at Bristol. And the Methodists got this. He, like I said, he didn't say, hey, let's start a new church and call it Methodist. No, he just said, let's try to revive the faith in England. So his friend Whitfield, back to the Holy Club, that Methodist group, said, John, we can't just expect people to all of a sudden show up in our churches. People that have been cut off from the church, that feel alienated. We're going to have to take faith to where they're at. We're going to have to take it out on the streets. When people are coming out of the mines, they've been working in there for 14, 16 hours. We need to be there. Wesley was very traditional. He says, oh, that doesn't, I've been ordained now as an Anglican priest. I don't know if I can do that. Whitfield keeps talking to him. And one day he goes with Whitfield's. People are coming out of the mines, their whole face covered with black soot. And he sees how moved they are by somebody caring about them, trying to speak the truth to them. And so the Methodist movement starts becoming a street movement, a field movement. But then the real genius was Wesley said, we can't just be in big groups. We got to get people in rooms like we're in the room tonight. And he started calling what they call class meetings. And people would meet about a group this size, and they would talk about their faith, talk about what happened to them during the week. They would talk about how they could help the poor, or they were poor, helping each other. And so the whole movement of Methodism generated around two things: these unbelievable outdoor worship experiences. He goes to the Gwynedd Pit in Cornwall, and there was this old deserted coal mine, but the acoustics of it was that he could get down in the bottom of that and speak up. And there were, one day there were 30,000 people that he spoke to without a PA system, which is amazing. So he went all about England, having these outdoor services, and the big part of it was music. His brother Charles was a great musician, and Charles said, "You know, some of the best music is in the saloons and pubs." And he said, "Why does the best music belong to the pubs? Let's take some of these folk tunes, and we'll make hymns. Christ the Lord is risen today, of 4,000 tongues to sing." Charles Wesley. You're looking about, if you're tired of one of my sermons one Sunday, flip you back to him on Charles Wesley, and you see how many. Now, I think there's like 50 or something hymns in our hymn, but he wrote over 200, maybe 400, I can't remember. So Wesley starts riding horseback all over England. He'll preach 7 or 8 times a day. Now, Wesley told us everything he ever did because he had a journal. We know every meal he had, every letter he wrote, every conversation he had. And we know this. He rode 350,000 miles on horseback. Who was it that mentioned how old he was when he died? Somebody, what was it?
88.
Yeah, and he preached up to his upper 80s. He was preaching like 15, 20 times a week. It's an unbelievable story. He was kind of a Renaissance man. He wrote books about the cures for balding, early studies of electroshock therapy. He was a kind of learned man. Just, you know, he had a type A personality. I will tell you that. But anyway, he started this, and this house in Bristol was not meant to be a sanctuary. It was a meeting house where people would come and children would get help and be tutored, where social services were handed out. It was called a meeting house. And that was one of the first Methodist buildings. That's in Britain. And it's still just like it was in his day.
Can I ask something about this question for them?
Yes.
So do y'all notice anything different about the picture? Not the one that Rob's in, but the picture of the pulpit. Do you notice anything different about it or unique about it?
It's like guarded off.
It's guarded off. Yeah. So wasn't it where he had to kind of come underneath, right? To get up and out?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which sometimes came in handy when John Wesley would upset people with some of his sermons, right?
Yeah.
He'd have to sneak out. Yeah. It was to protect him from the people. I remember learning about that when I took confirmation, but it's interesting. Yeah. We don't have one of these. Our pulpit's easy to get to. We don't have to climb under into the floor.
Very extremely.
Yeah. I'll let you go on then.
I think that's the last picture.
Yeah, last picture.
That's it, yeah.
A little bit of St. Paul's. We don't have those.
I don't have those on here.
We've gone past our time anyway.
That's okay.
I didn't understand when he said they're in England, but did he come over to the States for a while? Was he here?
He sent people.
Oh, he sent people.
Yeah,
It was
so,
other people.
Yeah, Francis Asbury and Thomas Coates. Famous picture of him right outside of Bristol, the coast, and he's pushing the boat off, and he's sending them to the States.
Okay.
And then that's how did Methodism come here? You've got all these societies in England. What's happening? Colonies are growing here. And so these people from these Methodist societies came to the States. And Francis Asbury lived right here in Asheville. He preached on this site of Central Methodist. Okay.
So in a couple of weeks, we'll learn more about that. JP Bollock's going to come and share more about that part too.
I got a little carried away. I wouldn't.
No, that's okay. I think it was great. You shared all the things. So I want to ask a question to you all. When Rob was talking about Susanna Wesley, what did you hear about Susanna Wesley? So this is John Wesley's mom. You remember from the kitchen? What was something you heard that was interesting about her?
That she was a homeschool mom.
Yeah, that she homeschooled.
That she had a great education.
She had a great education, yeah. What else?
That she preached.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a woman.
Yeah. Which is hard for us living in today's time to think of that being interesting, because we have, you know, women in the room now who are learning, women who are preachers, but that was very unheard of back then. So the fact that she was ahead of her time, so to speak, with social norms was pretty awesome. I still think it was interesting that she had so many kids. I like the skirt thing where she'd hide herself under a skirt. Yeah, William, go ahead.
Did she birth all those children?
Yeah.
She did.
All 19?
All 19 of them. Yep.
All 7? No.
Yeah. Well, modern medicine just wasn't the same.
All the same time, or were they like different ages?
I think they're all different ages. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if we have an 19.
Jack, do you have a question?
I do. Sorry, we came in late. Sorry about that.
That's
I'm
okay.
so excited about this and everything. What's the time frame when John Wesley was doing this?
Yeah, he was born in 1703, and so he lived all his life was right through most of the 1700s.
He was born in 17.
So was he sending people to the States like around Revolutionary War time then?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Right, and particularly right after so a lot of the Asbury things were after the Revolutionary War into the early 1800s here. That's why our church, you know, there were meetings here on this ground like in the 1820s, and our church was started in 1836, and Asbury was still around at that time.
He came to the States, but not for long, right?
He never came to the States.
He never came to the States?
Well, he came to Georgia when he was a young man.
Right.
Yeah.
But not during the...
He didn't never come back.
Okay. Right. Go ahead.
So I have a question that I don't know if it goes back to Wesley or if it's a later development, so I may be getting too far ahead. When I was going through the PBS on the Black church, they made a statement, which I never thought about, but they said that the success in this country of the establishment of the Methodist church and the Baptist church they were both really strong, but the one big difference was that the Methodists wanted their clergy to be educated and required it, and that was not true of the Baptists. So does that go back to John Wesley?
I think it does. I think it absolutely does.
Yeah.
By the way, if you went to London there's the Wesley Chapel in London where Wesley died. There was a building there that became a Methodist worship center, and there was an apartment he lived in. Right across the street is where his mother is buried. And this is interesting. The cemetery that she's buried in is called the Dissident Cemetery. She was known as a person that went against the grain. People like Swift was buried. I'm trying to think of some other people that were buried at some other famous people. But I think that's interesting. John Wesley's mother was buried in the Dissident Cemetery.
Yeah. How many of you have ever been to Lake Junaluska before? So if you have, I think you've been. So Lake Junaluska is only about, 30 minutes from here. There is a Susanna Wesley Garden on the premise there, and it's beautiful. Sometimes we'll try to go there with confirmation groups, but I don't know if we'll get to this year, but it's just a really neat place to be. I mean, she's not, buried there or anything, but it's just a really nice. Not in the garden, but yeah, at Lake Junaluska.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of Methodist history at Lake Junaluska too, which is not far from us, which is neat. Any questions for Rob?
I think you might mention the Moravians that changed his life are also very close geographically.
Yes. If you live in the Winston-Salem area, you'll get to know the Moravians. That's a very strong sect there. They're very strong up in Pennsylvania, in the Winston-Salem area. And if you've been to Moravian church, you're going to always hear a really good brass band.
Yep.
And you can get some of the best cookies in the world.
My great aunt was Moravian, and we used to go at Christmas time. And instead of doing, they would have this like really sweet,
the love feast.
The love feast, yeah. And it was like this sweet bread and juice, like communion, but
it's almost
not.
like a mocha coffee.
Yeah. Oh, it was so good. And as a kid, it was my favorite part of the whole service.
So what side did the Moravians come from?
You know, they were part of the German Reformation and kind of broke off from the Lutheran Church. So they were part of the Reformation that came out of Germany.
Yeah.
The Reformation in England all had to do with Henry VIII. You know, he broke from the Catholic Church because he was mad at the Pope. So.
Yeah. Any other questions? Anyone online or here in person? Questions, thoughts? Okay, Rob, thank you so much for sharing your story and your pictures. I appreciate it. So what we're going to do now, just to give ourselves a chance to kind of talk a little bit deeper into what we learned, we're going to break into small groups. You all, what was something that you learned today? Just something small. What is something that you all learned from our gathering this evening? It can be one thing, it can be many.
John Wesley had 19 siblings.
Right, he was one of 19. Yeah. But yes, that is correct. Thanks, Holden. What else? What's another thing anyone learned? Yeah, go ahead, Max. That John Wesley was a person, exactly. He was a person that was important also.
Can it be directly today or
something today? Something within the...
Oh, that John Wesley was that started this church.
The method, yeah. John Wesley started the Methodist movement, so to speak. Yeah. What else? What are other things you learned?
His mom was pretty amazing.
His mom was pretty amazing. Yes. Thank you, Scott. It's important. Yeah, go ahead.
Probably a bad idea to have 19 kids.
Probably a bad idea to have 19 kids. Yeah. Well, at least probably more than 12 would live in this day and age. Yeah. It's a lot of kids. Anyone else? What other things did you learn?
That people are people and have problems.
That's right. Even John Wesley. Yeah. People are people. We all have problems. We all have doubts, but that's okay. We can still be great about it. I like it. Thanks, Jack. What else? Who remembers what year John Wesley was born? 1703. Who remembers how he almost tragically died as a kid?
On fire.
In a fire. Yes. Who remembers John Wesley's brother's name? Who wrote all the hymns? Charles. Yeah. So next time you're in church, this will be something fun for you to do, like Rob suggested. If you look in your hymn book, sometimes even the hymns that we sing, I think it was in First Pres as well. In the top corner, it says Charles Wesley. He wrote a lot of the hymns in the Methodist hymnal. So next time you're at church, you can go to the index in the back and it'll tell you exactly how many he wrote. Yeah. Yeah. He took songs from the bar and kept the same music, kept the same beat, and then just put hymns in front of them. Yeah.
So we worship with songs from a bar.
Yeah, exactly. That's how
and that's because they do those melodies.
Yeah, that's how he brought people into church. They were like, "Hey, I know that too."
like sea shanties, right? I mean, this sort of like pub song sea shanties.
Yeah, similar. Yep. This was 1700, so yeah. He said he learned that the Reformation, the Methodist movement was not something that John Wesley tried to create. He tried to reform the Anglican Church, which is what we know in the United States as the Episcopal Church. So he never really wanted to start his own church. He just really wanted, kind of like with Jesus, honestly, right? Like Jesus never wanted to start the Christian faith. Jesus tried to reform the Jewish church. And so it's pretty cool. Yes, Annabelle.
Can we play some of the keys on the organ?
That's a Corey question, maybe. I don't think you want to be behind the organ with the keys being played, though. Your ears might blow off.
That's so loud.
Yeah. All right. All right, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. I appreciate it. And I will see you in 2 weeks.